Hare Krishna. Today we will be discussing Srimad Bhagavad-Gita As It Is, Chapter 15, Text 6, Translation. That abode of mine is not illuminated by the sun or moon, nor by electricity. One who reaches it never returns to this material world again. The spiritual world, the abode of Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, which is known as Krishna Loka, Goloka Vrindavana, is described here. In the spiritual sky, there is no need of sunshine, moonshine, fire, or electricity because all the planets are self-luminous. We have only one planet in this universe, the sun, which is self-luminous. But all the planets in the spiritual sky are self-luminous. The shining effulgence of all those planets called Vaikunthas constitutes the shining sky known as a Brahma-Jyoti. Actually, the effulgence is emanating from the planet of Krishna, Goloka Vrindavana. Part of that shining effluence is covered by the Mahatattva, the material world. Other than this, the major portion of that shining sky is full of spiritual planets, which are called Vaikunthas, chief of which is Goloka Vrindavana. As long as living entity is in the dark material world, he is in conditional life. But as soon as he reaches the spiritual sky by cutting through the false perverted tree of this material world, he becomes liberated. Then there is no chance of his coming back here in his conditioned life. The living entity considers himself to be the lord of this material world, but in his liberated state he enters into the spiritual kingdom and becomes an associate of the Supreme Lord. There he enjoys eternal bliss, eternal life, and full of knowledge. One should be captivated by this information. He should desire to transfer himself to that eternal world and extricate himself from this false reflection of reality. For one who is too much attached to this material world, it is very difficult to cut that attachment. But if he takes to Krishna Consciousness, there is a chance of gradually becoming detached. One has to associate himself with devotees, those who are in Krishna Consciousness. One should search out a society dedicated to the Krishna Consciousness and learn how to discharge devotional service. In this way, he can cut off his attachment to the material world. One cannot become detached from the attraction of the material world simply by dressing himself in a saffron cloth. He must become attached to the devotional service of the Lord. Therefore, one should take it very seriously. The devotional service, as described in the 12th chapter, is the only way to get out of this false representation of the real tree. In chapter 14, the contamination of all kinds of processes by material nature is described. Only devotional service is described as a purely transcendental. The words Paramam Mamam are very important here. Actually, every nook and corner is the property of the Supreme Lord, but the spiritual world is Paramam, full of six opulences. In the Upanishads, it is also confirmed that in spiritual world there is no need of a sunshine or moonshine, for the whole spiritual sky is illuminated by the internal potency of a Supreme Lord. That Supreme Abode can be achieved only by surrender and by no other means. Text 7 Translation. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to the conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which includes the mind. In this verse, the identity of a living being is clearly given. The living entity in the fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord eternally. It is not that he assumes individuality in his conditioned life and his liberated state becomes one with the Supreme Lord. He is eternally fragmented. It is clearly said, Sanatana, according to the Vedic version. The Supreme Lord manifests and expands himself in innumerable expansions, of which the primary expansions are called Vishnu Tattva. The secondary expansions are called the living entities. In other words, the Vishnu Tattva is the personal expansion, and the living entities are separated expansions. By his personal expansion, he is manifested in various forms like Lord Rama, Narasimhadeva, Vishnumurti, and all other predominating deities in Vaikuntha planets. The separated expansions, the living entities, are eternally servitors. The personal expansions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the individual identities of the Godhead, are always present. Similarly, the separated expansions of the living entities have their identities as a fragmental parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord. The living entity have also fragmental qualities of which independence is one. Every living entity has an individual soul, his personal individuality, and minute of the independence. By misuse of that independence, one becomes a conditioned soul, and by proper use of independence, he is always liberated. In either case, he is qualitatively eternal. As the Supreme Lord is in his liberated state, he is freed from his material condition and he is under the engagement of transcendental service into the Lord. In his conditioned life, he is dominated by the material modes of nature and he forgets the transcendental loving service of the Lord. As a result, he is to struggle very hard to maintain his existence in the material world. The living entity, not only the human being and the cats and dogs, but even the greater controllers of the material world, Brahma, Lord Shiva, and even Vishnu, are all part and parcels of Supreme Lord. They are all eternal, not temporary manifestation. The word karsati, struggling or grappling hard, is very significant. The conditioned soul is bound up. As though shackled by iron chain, he is bound by the false ego, and the mind is the chief agent which is driving him in the material existence. When the mind is in the mode of goodness, his activities are good. When the mind is in the mode of passion, his activities are troublesome. And when the mind is in the mode of ignorance, it travels into the lower species of life. It is clear, however, in these verse that the conditioned soul is covered by the material body with the mind and the senses, and when he is liberated, this material covering perishes, but his spiritual body manifests in its individual capacity. The following information is there in the Madhyanandi Nayana Sruti. It is stated here that when a living entity gives up the material embodiment and enters into the spiritual world, he receives his spiritual body, and in his spiritual body he can see the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face. He can hear and speak to him face to face, and he can understand the Supreme Personality as he is. In Smriti also it is understood that in the spiritual planets everyone lives in bodies featured like the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As far as the bodily construction is concerned, there is no difference between the part and parcel of living entities and the expansions of Vishnumurti. In other words, at liberation the living entity gets a spiritual body by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The word Mamayavamsa, fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, is also very significant. The fragmental portion of the Supreme Lord is not like some material broken part. We have already understood in the second chapter that the spirit cannot be cut into pieces. This fragment is not materially conceived. It is not like a matter which can be cut into the pieces and joined together again. That conception is not applicable here because the Sanskrit word sanatana, eternal, is used. The fragmental portion is eternal. It is also stated in the beginning of the second chapter that dehinosmin yata, in each and every individual body, the fragmental portion of a Supreme Lord is present. This fragmental portion, when liberated from the bodily engaged entanglement, revives its original spiritual body in the spiritual sky, in the spiritual planet, and enjoys association with the Supreme Lord. It is, however, understood here that the living entity, being the fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, is qualitatively one, just as a part and parcel of a gold or as gold, also gold. Text 8 translation. The living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another as the air carries aromas. Here the living entity is described as a Ishvara, the controller of his own body. If he likes, he can change his body to a higher grade, and if he likes, he can move to a lower class. Minute independence is there. The change his body undergoes depends upon him. At the time of death, the consciousness he has created will carry him on to the next type of body. If he has made his consciousness like that of a cat or dog, he is sure to change to a cat's or dog's body. And if he had fixed his consciousness on a godly qualities, he will change into the form of a demigod. And if he is in a Krishna consciousness, he will be transferred to Krishna Loka in the spiritual world and will associate with Krishna. It is a false claim that after the annihilation of the body, everything is finished. The individual soul is transmigrating from one body to another, and this present body and present activities are the background of his next body. One gets a different body according to karma, and he has to quit this body in due course. It is stated here that the subtle body which carries the conception of the next body develops another body in the next life. This process of transmigrating from one body to another and struggling while in the body is called Kshatri, or the struggling for existence. Text 9 translation. The living entity, thus taking another gross body, obtains a certain type of ear, tongue, and nose, and the sense of touch, which are grouped above the mind. He thus enjoys a particular set of sense objects. In other words, if the living entity adulterates his consciousness with the qualities of a cats and dogs, in his next life he gets a cat or a dog body and enjoys. Consciousness is originally pure like a water. But if you mix a water with a certain color, it changes. Similarly, consciousness is pure. If the spirit soul is pure, but consciousness is changed according to the association of the material qualities. Real consciousness is Krishna consciousness. When there is one is situated in Krishna consciousness, he is in his pure life. But if his consciousness is adulterated by some type of materially, mentally, in the next life, he gets a corresponding body. He does not necessarily get a human body again. He can get the body of a cat, dog, hog, demigod, or any form, other forms. From there are 84 lakh species of living entities. Text 10 translation. The foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this. The word jnana, chakshu, is very significant. Without knowledge, one cannot understand how a living entity leaves this present body, nor what form of body he is going to take in the next life, nor even why he is living in the particular type of body. This requires a great amount of knowledge understood from Bhagavad-Gita and similar literature heard from the bona fide spiritual master. One who is trained to perceive all these things is fortunate. Every living entity is quitting this body under certain circumstances. He is living under certain circumstances and enjoying under circumstances under the spell of material nature. As a result, he is suffering different kinds of happiness and distress. Under the illusion of a sense enjoyment, persons who are everlastingly fooled by lust and desire lose all power of understanding the change of body, and they stay in the particular body. They cannot comprehend it. Those who have developed spiritual knowledge, however, can see that the spirit is different from the body and is changing its body and enjoying in different ways. A person in such a knowledge can understand how the conditioned living entity is suffering in the material existence. Therefore, those who are highly developed in Krishna consciousness try their best to give this knowledge to the people in general. For those, their conditioned life is very much troublesome. They should come out of it and be in Krishna consciousness and liberate themselves to transfer to the spiritual world. Hare Krishna, which ends the text 10 translation of Srimad